While phrases such as "you throw like a girl" or "man up" may seem innocuous at first, we maintain that they hold the same influence over our outlook on life as proverbs like "don't judge a book by its cover" and "distance makes the heart grow fonder." While consciously we are capable of disagreeing with these statements to whatever extent that may be, if we don't outwardly do so, then we are perpetuating and validating its sentiment. Thusly, we allow that sentiment to influence not only the behavior of others, whether that's not judging a person by their appearance, experimenting with a long distance relationship, or having a low perception of the physical abilities of women, but also to lay down the acceptable values to hold in our social circles.
Because of this impact that language can have on one's perception of the world, exclusionary and seemingly innocuous language can lead to the internalizing of stereotypes and bigoted ideas which contribute to a larger social problem. Viewing attempts to reform language as somehow trivial and frivolous fails to consider that political issues and power structures don't exist in isolation from language and socialization, but are rather a direct product of this. Studies have shown that workplaces and countries using heavily gendered language lead to more pronounced gender disparities, with 11% fewer women working, a 25% increase in the gender wage gap, as well as a 2-year gender gap in educational attainment. This demonstrates how social issues are not only inextricably linked to exclusionary language, but are directly enforced by it. By allowing one to continue, we're permitting the other.
Additionally, while choosing to deflect the focus of activism away from language reform and towards urging for more institutional reform, government change may appear more efficient. It is ultimately counterproductive, as many issues that are caused by public perception and biases are very difficult for the state alone to counteract. For example, despite the fact that black women and transgender men have one of the highest rates of poverty and lowest access to medical services, maternal mortality rates are still 36% higher amongst rich black women than poor white women. And 2% of transgender men with access to a GP are still refused to care for pregnancy and menstrual health. This reflects how attempting to promote equity on the legislative government level is relatively limited in amending healthcare disparities, because they stem less from income inequality and more from doctors' biases and preconceived assumptions that black women have higher pain tolerances, with nearly half of doctors believing that black women have thicker skin. This demonstrates that systematic change on the government level is not always sufficient in resolving important issues, and thus must require an interpersonal commitment between individuals to dispel stereotypical language. This language ranges from the black women, black girl magic trope that assumes that black women can easily overcome pain, and to phrases such as pregnant women, which exclude transgender men and non-binary people from discussions of their own reproductive health. It all reveals the importance of shifting our language and the way we talk about gender, race, and ability. In our interpersonal conversations, a general principle would be to forfeit essentialist, prescriptive language and phrasing in order to avoid perpetuating ideas about what the standard or default body should be like.
Arguing that changing societal norms to accommodate the sensibilities of the few is too difficult or inconvenient asserts the idea that society is designed for the able-bodied first and the disabled second. That because one of them is a minority, their needs are of less value and are not worth being catered for than the needs of the majority. The fact that there are so many disadvantaged groups that aren't being catered for in our society should be a reflection of how regressive and exclusionary it is, and for the need of a radical restructuring of society rather than a sign of cynicism. Arguing that disabled people should expect to be triggered, as such practices are so ingrained in our cultural norms, means that we are allowing disabled people to cut themselves out from society rather than be functioning members of society so as to please and not inconvenience the majority. These things should not be done in the name of preparing them for the real world. Instead, the real world should be reformed. Short-term inconvenience is a given for long-term progress and inclusivity.
There are fears that attempts by journalists to use different language in order to avoid appearing racist undermine certain issues by removing nuance. For example, during the R. Kelly sex abuse scandal, media outlets did not give the scandal the gravity deserved, and even attempted to shame R. Kelly's accusers so as to not perpetuate the trope of black men being sexual predators. However, consider this. Infighting within both women's and black movements has harmed black women, leading to 93% of them not reporting sexual assault, due to the lack of support from black movements, which tend to view reporting against black men as a betrayal against their brothers and the black cause, not to mention that the Me Too movement is predominantly focused on white survivors. With this in mind, the R. Kelly scandal was not caused by the media's excessive sensitivity regarding the plight of black men, but rather the lack of sensitivity regarding the issues of black women when it comes to their specific experiences with assault and reporting. This illustrates how rather than abandon our attempts to reform language when discussing certain groups of people, we should rather become more intersectional in our approach and expand it to include more groups of people.
Somebody who is unwilling to use accommodating language and behavior in the interpersonal relationships is no better than somebody that does not think before they speak, or somebody that is unabasing in their lack of consideration for others. The consequences are the same. It is just as much a responsibility to make social spaces as inclusive as possible as it is to clean up after oneself. The idea that modifying one's language and behavior to accommodate the marginalized, disadvantaged, or simply to avoid propagating prescriptive ideas is in some ways superfluous, inconvenient, or a sign of fragility and naivety in younger generations is instinctive. However, there are hurdles of intuition that historically society has always been called to overcome for social progression, even if only in our small circles. Thank you.